January 14th,
Keep your hands up.
1945.
Move forward slowly. Get over there
Late
now.
afternoon. Somewhere outside Bastogne, Belgium. The snow has turned gray with exhaust and churned mud. Boots crunch as a column of exhausted German soldiers shuffles down a frozen road, hands raised, rifles abandoned in the slush. Their breath hangs in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Obergefreiter Karl Weiss hasn't eaten properly in 2 days. His wool greatcoat is stiff with ice. His fingers are numb, barely able to grip the thin blanket draped over his shoulders. Somewhere behind him, an American half-track idles, engine growling low, its crew watching with a mix of boredom and curiosity. This is it, Weiss thinks. Capture. For months, the warnings had been drilled into him, by officers, by pamphlets, by radio broadcasts crackling through ruined barracks. American captivity means hunger. American captivity means revenge. American captivity means humiliation. He had believed every word. The Wehrmacht is collapsing all around him. The Ardennes offensive has failed. The promised fuel never arrived. The artillery that was supposed to clear the way never came. And now, as U.S. infantrymen from the 101st Airborne wave him forward, Weiss expects the worst. A rifle butt. A kick. An insult spat in English he won't understand. Instead, an American soldier gestures calmly. Move along. No shouting, no blows. The column is searched quickly, efficiently. Helmets taken, watches removed, papers collected. A young American private hands Weiss a cigarette already lit, the ember glowing bright against the winter gloom. Weiss hesitates, then takes it. The smoke burns his throat. He hasn't had tobacco in weeks. The taste feels unreal, like something remembered from another life. They march for hours, past shattered villages, burned-out panthers half buried in snowbanks, civilians peering from broken windows, silent. As night falls, the prisoners are loaded onto trucks. Canvas flaps snap in the wind. Engines roar. The road carries them west, away from the front, away from the war. No one speaks. Not because they aren't allowed to. Because they don't know what comes next. 3 days later, Karl Weiss steps off a train in France. The camp is surrounded by barbed wire, yes, but it isn't what he imagined. The guards wear clean uniforms. Their rifles are slung, not raised. Watchtowers stand at intervals, but no one is shouting orders or barking threats. The sign reads simply, PW Enclosure, U.S. Army. Inside the wire, long rows of tents stretch across a muddy field. Smoke rises from chimneys. The smell reaches Weiss before anything else. Food. Not thin soup. Not burned turnips. Real food. He smells meat. The prisoners are processed one by one, names recorded, units noted, ranks stripped of authority. Weiss is given a number, a blanket, and directed toward a mess line. This is where it happens. The moment that will stay with him long after the war ends. He reaches the front of the line. An American cook, broad-shouldered, apron stained with grease, looks up briefly, then ladles food onto a metal tray. Thick stew, chunks of beef visible beneath the steam. Bread, white and soft, not the dark, rationed loaves Weiss has known for years. A pat of butter. A tin cup filled with hot coffee. Real coffee. Weiss stares. The cook clears his throat. Move it along. The tray trembles in Weiss's hand as he steps aside. Around him, other German prisoners are frozen in the same disbelief. Some laugh softly, the sound bordering on hysteria. Others glance suspiciously at the food, as if waiting for a trick. One whispers, "Is this for today?" Another mutters, "It must be for the guards." But no one stops them. They sit, they eat. The first bite is almost painful. The heat floods Weiss's mouth. The meat is tender. The bread tears easily between his fingers. Butter melts instantly against it. This isn't survival food. This is abundance. And that is when the propaganda begins to crack. Because Weiss knows something the broadcasts never mentioned. The Geneva Convention. The Americans aren't just feeding them enough to survive. They are feeding them the same rations issued to their own soldiers. He looks up, suddenly aware of the guards watching, not with cruelty but with indifference. This is normal to them, routine. To Weiss, it feels like stepping into another world. That night, lying on a straw-filled mattress, stomach full for the first time in months, Weiss stares at the canvas ceiling of the tent. He remembers the posters back home, caricatures of Americans as savage, fat, brutal creatures. He remembers officers warning them that surrender meant slow death. And now this. Warm food. Hot coffee. No beatings. A question forms in his mind, dangerous and quiet. If this was a lie, what else was? Outside the tent, a generator hums steadily, providing electric light. Weiss hasn't seen electric light after dark in weeks. He closes his eyes, unsettled not by fear, but by doubt. Because somewhere between the first bite of bread and the last sip of coffee, the war he thought he understood has shifted. And he doesn't yet realize that this moment, this meal, is only the beginning of a far deeper shock. Morning comes without shouting. Carl Weiss wakes to the low murmur of voices and the dull clatter of metal cups. Pale winter light filters through the tent canvas, revealing rows of men slowly sitting up, rubbing sleep from their eyes. For a brief, disoriented moment, Weiss forgets where he is. Then he remembers. A prisoner. He waits for the fear to return. It doesn't. Instead, there is an unfamiliar sensation in his stomach. Warmth, fullness. The stew from the night before still sits heavy and real, not like a dream that dissolves at dawn. Outside, an American guard walks past the tent, boots crunching on frost. He glances inside, nods once, and continues on. No threats, no insults. Weiss exchanges a look with the man beside him, a former Unteroffizier named Franz Keller. Keller raises an eyebrow, silently asking the same question. When does it start? They dress quickly and fall into line. Habit takes over. Years of drilling do not vanish overnight. Even in captivity, the men stand straighter than they mean to. Breakfast is waiting. Not scraps. Not thin porridge. Powdered eggs steaming slightly. Bacon, bread again. Coffee so strong it smells almost sweet. A murmur ripples through the line. This must be temporary, someone whispers. They want information, another says. They'll stop once we're inside America. The belief in cruelty is stubborn. It has to be. To accept this kindness too quickly would mean admitting something unbearable, that everything they had been told was a lie. Weiss eats slowly this time, watching the guards searching for signs. A smirk, a delayed punishment, anything to confirm what he expects. Nothing happens. After breakfast, the prisoners are marched to a fenced yard. An American officer addresses them through an interpreter. His German is accented but clear. You will follow camp rules. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. If you obey orders, there will be no trouble. The words feel rehearsed, procedural, as if this has been said thousands of times before. Which Weiss realizes it has. Later that day, they are issued supplies. Soap, razors, clean socks. Weiss holds the razor in his hand, turning it over, half expecting it to be taken away. It is. He shaves for the first time in weeks. The face that emerges in the small mirror startles him. Thinner, older, but human again. That afternoon, trucks arrive. The prisoners are told they are being moved. This is the moment Weiss has been waiting for. Transfers are where things change, where guards become harsher, where disappearances happen. They board the trucks in silence. Hours later, they reach the port. The ship waiting for them is massive gray steel rising from the water like a wall. Weiss smells salt, oil, and something else, fresh paint. They are herded aboard down into the hold. Hammocks hang in neat rows. Ventilation fans hum overhead. Lights flick on, bright and steady. An American sailor hands out blankets. Another distributes cigarettes. Weiss sits heavily on the edge of a hammock, heart pounding. A sailor notices his stare and shrugs. Long trip, he says, then moves on. The Atlantic crossing takes weeks. No beatings. No starvation. No executions. They are fed 3 times a day, allowed on deck in shifts, given medical care when men fall ill. One older lancer collapses from exhaustion and is carried to the infirmary by American corpsmen. Alive. Very much alive. By the time the Statue of Liberty appears on the horizon, an impossible shape rising from the mist, Weiss no longer knows what to think. Some prisoners laugh when they see it. Others cry. Weiss feels something colder and sharper. Confusion. They are transported by train across a landscape that seems endless. Towns flash by with intact buildings. Farms stretch to the horizon, barns full, fields undamaged. Children wave from crossings. Some women stare. A few even smile. No one throws stones. No one spits. At the camp in the American South, the guards change uniforms but not behavior. The fences are higher, the watchtowers more permanent, yet inside the routine remains the same. Food, work details, recreation. Yes, recreation. A soccer field appears, then a baseball diamond, musical instruments, a library stocked with German-language books including Goethe and Schiller. Weiss picks one up, half expecting it to vanish. It doesn't. The first Red Cross inspection happens a week later. The officer walks calmly through the camp, clipboard in hand. Prisoners speak freely. Complaints are noted. Adjustments are promised. Promised and kept. That night, Weiss lies awake again, but this time his thoughts spiral in a different direction. If the Americans are monsters, why do they follow rules? If captivity is supposed to be torture, why does it feel orderly? The answer frightens him more than cruelty ever could. Because cruelty would confirm the world he understands. This does not. The realization creeps in slowly, like dawn light under a door. The Reich had needed an enemy without mercy. So it invented one. And now, surrounded by hot meals and quiet nights, Karl Weiss begins to understand that the greatest weapon in this camp is not barbed wire or rifles. It is the truth. And soon, the Americans will use it deliberately. The first argument breaks out over chess. Not shouting, not fists, just 2 German prisoners staring at the board between them, pieces frozen mid-game, as if neither can believe the move that's just been made. That's impossible, Franz Keller mutters. He wouldn't allow it. Karl Weiss says nothing. He's stopped correcting people lately. The chess set is real, solid wood, not carved from scraps or issued reluctantly. It's just there in the recreation hut, alongside checkers, books, even a phonograph that plays scratchy American jazz in the evenings. None of this fits the world they were promised. Weeks pass, then months. The camp settles into a rhythm that feels disturbingly close to civilian life. Wake up, breakfast, work details in nearby farms or factories, lunch, more work, dinner, lights out. Work details pay money. Not much, but enough to buy extra food from the camp canteen, chocolate, toothpaste, stationery. Weiss holds his first issued dollar bills like forbidden artifacts, American money, earned as a prisoner. He sends most of it home through the Red Cross. He wonders if his mother will believe where it came from. Some prisoners cling harder to the old beliefs. They have to. Admitting the truth would mean admitting complicity, guilt, years of obedience built on lies. One night in the barracks, a man named Otto explodes. "They're softening us," he says, voice shaking. "This is psychological warfare. They want us weak." No one argues, because the thought is comforting. If this is a trick, then the world still makes sense. But Weiss has noticed something else. The guards don't lecture. They don't threaten. They don't demand loyalty. They don't even seem to care what the prisoners think. That indifference is devastating. An American sergeant named Miller supervises Weiss's work detail at a lumber yard. Miller is older, his uniform worn thin, his helmet dented. He chews gum constantly and listens more than he talks. One afternoon, during a break, Miller offers Weiss a cigarette. Again. Weiss hesitates, then accepts. "Why do you do this?" Weiss asks quietly, gesturing at the camp beyond the fence. Miller shrugs. "War'll end, you'll go home." That's it. No lecture about democracy, no boasting, just a simple statement of fact. That night, Weiss cannot sleep. Because for the first time, he allows himself to imagine a future beyond the uniform. The camp newspaper appears soon after. Printed in German, edited by prisoners under American supervision, it reports war news, real news, Allied advances, cities falling, dates, maps. There is no attempt to soften the truth. Berlin is bombed. The Eastern Front has collapsed. The Red Army is approaching the Oder. Some men refuse to read it. Others read obsessively. Weiss reads every word. The Americans also screen films, documentaries, newsreels, carefully selected but not fabricated. Images of liberated camps appear late one evening. Emaciated bodies, mass graves, survivors staring hollow-eyed at the camera. The room is silent. Someone vomits. Someone else stands up and leaves, shaking. Weiss doesn't move. He had heard rumors at the front, whispers quickly shut down, jokes made to drown discomfort. Now the images burn into his memory. This is the moment the propaganda finally dies. Not because an American says anything. Because reality speaks for itself. After the screening, no one talks. Men lie awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing the hum of electricity and the distant sound of a train whistle. Weiss thinks of the food, the kindness, the order. And then he thinks of what was done in his name. The contrast is unbearable. Days later, another Red Cross inspection. More questions, more notes, more compliance. The Americans are not perfect. There are arguments, fights, occasional punishments, but the structure holds, the rules matter. This, Weiss realizes, is the true shock. Not that the Americans are kind, but that they are consistent. Consistency undermines fear. Fear had kept Weiss loyal far longer than belief ever did. As spring approaches, rumors spread. Germany is finished. Hitler is dead. The war will end soon. No one knows what to believe anymore. Weiss stands at the fence one evening, watching the sun dip behind the trees. Beyond the wire, the world continues, calm and intact. Inside, something has already ended. The man who arrived expecting brutality is gone. In his place stands someone who has tasted truth and cannot untaste it. But the final reckoning is still ahead. Because freedom, when it comes, will bring a question far heavier than captivity ever did. And Weiss is not yet ready to answer it. May 7, 1945. Early evening. A humid dusk settles over the camp. Karl Weiss is on kitchen duty when the siren sounds. Not the sharp, urgent wail of an air raid. This is different, longer, almost celebratory. Guards step out of offices, trucks stop mid-roll. A group of American soldiers gathers near the flagpole. Then the announcement comes, filtered through loudspeakers that crackle with static. Germany has surrendered. For a moment, no one reacts. The words hang in the air, unreal. Then the camp changes. Some prisoners cheer, laughter spilling out like a pressure valve finally released. Others sit down where they stand, faces buried in their hands. A few stare blankly, as if the sound has passed through them without leaving a mark. Weiss doesn't cheer. He feels hollow. The war he fought for is over. The country he thought he knew no longer exists in the form he believed in. There will be no victory parades, no heroic homecoming. Only questions. That night the Americans allow a small gathering. No speeches, no triumph, just quiet acknowledgement. Coffee is served again. Someone produces a harmonica. A song begins, tentative and unsure. Weiss watches Sergeant Miller lean against a truck, arms crossed, eyes tired. "You're free men now," Miller says later almost casually. Free. The word lands heavily. Freedom had been the promise of the Reich. It had delivered only obedience and fear. Now, offered quietly by an enemy, it feels dangerous. The following days are filled with paperwork and waiting. Discharge forms, medical checks, lists posted and updated. The prisoners are no longer called prisoners. They are displaced personnel. Food remains the same, rations unchanged. No sudden tightening of rules, no revenge. If anything, the Americans relax. Weiss is given civilian clothes, plain, ill-fitting but not striped, not marked. The uniform that defined him for years is folded, tagged, and taken away. He watches it go without regret. Before departure, another film is shown. This one is longer, more complete. The camps, the bodies, the survivors speaking directly to the camera. No one looks away this time. The Americans do not gloat, they do not accuse, they let the images speak. This, Weiss realizes, is the final act. Not punishment. Confrontation. The transport back to Europe takes weeks. The ship is quieter now. No nervous jokes, no whispered theories, just men staring at the horizon. Weiss spends most of the journey writing, letters he will never send, words he doesn't yet know how to say aloud. When they reach Germany, the silence deepens. Cities reduced to rubble, rail yards twisted and burned, people moving like ghosts through familiar streets made alien. His mother's house still stands somehow. She opens the door slowly, as if afraid of what she might see. She stares at him for a long moment. "You look healthy," she says finally. Weiss almost laughs. That night they eat together, thin soup, black bread, rationed portions. The reality of defeat tastes far harsher than captivity ever did. Weeks later, as Weiss helps clear debris from a collapsed building, he thinks back to the first meal in the American camp. The bread, the butter, the coffee. It was not just food. It was a message. Not shouted, not written, simply demonstrated. This is how we live. This is how we treat prisoners. This is what the world can look like. For Weiss and for hundreds of thousands like him, that lesson does not fade. Years later, when he tells the story to his son, he does not begin with the fighting or the surrender. He begins with a tray. Steam rising from stew. White bread tearing easily in his hands. Coffee hot enough to burn. Because that was the moment the lies began to die. And in their place, something far more difficult was born. Morning arrives without shouting. Carl Weiss wakes to the low murmur of voices and the scrape of boots on frozen ground. Pale light seeps through the canvas roof of the tent. For a moment, he doesn't move. He waits. This is usually when it begins. At the front, morning started with screaming, whistles, kicks to get men moving faster than bodies could manage. Here there is only routine, calm, almost patience. Weiss sits up slowly. Around him, other German prisoners do the same, exchanging uncertain glances. No one speaks. Everyone is listening for something that never comes. Outside, an American guard walks past, hands in his pockets, rifle slung casually over one shoulder. He doesn't look inside the tent. He doesn't have to. Breakfast forms up quickly. The line moves with practiced obedience, yet every man expects the portion to shrink, the trick to reveal itself. It doesn't. Powdered eggs, bacon grease glistening in the cold air, bread again, coffee so strong it cuts through the morning chill. Weiss watches the ladle closely, certain it will hesitate at the last second. It doesn't. The tray is full. He sits on a rough bench and eats in silence. Around him, men chew slowly, suspiciously, as if the food might vanish if consumed too quickly. "This won't last," someone mutters. "They're trying to get information," another whispers. Weiss says nothing. He is watching the guards. They eat the same food, drink the same coffee, joke quietly among themselves. No separation, no performance. After breakfast, they are assembled in the yard. A U.S. Army captain steps forward, flanked by an interpreter. His uniform is clean, his tone neutral. "You are prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention," the interpreter says. "You will be fed, housed, and treated accordingly." The words land heavily. The Geneva Convention had been mentioned during training, briefly, dismissively, something the enemy pretended to follow. Now it is being enforced. Supplies are issued next. Soap, towels, razors. Weiss turns the razor over in his hand, a real blade, sharp, trust given freely. He shaves that afternoon, watching dark stubble fall into a basin. The man staring back at him from the mirror looks less like a soldier and more like a civilian caught in the wrong year. That night, they are told to prepare for transport. This is it, Weiss thinks. This is where it changes. They are loaded onto trucks, then onto a train, and finally onto a ship. The Atlantic stretches endless and gray around them. Below deck, hammocks are strung neatly. Ventilation fans hum. Lights burn steadily through the night. They are fed 3 times a day. When a man collapses from exhaustion, American medics carry him away carefully, returning him hours later alive and resting. Alive. Days blur together. Weeks. The fear that once felt sharp and constant dulls into something unfamiliar. Doubt. When land finally appears again, Weiss expects hatred. He expects shouting crowds, stones, rage. Instead, he sees people standing quietly along the tracks. Some wave, some simply watch. No one spits. At the camp in the American interior, fences rise higher, towers stand firm, but inside the routine continues. Work details, recreation, a library stocked with German books, musical instruments, even a football field. It feels wrong. At night, Weiss lies awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady hum of electricity. If this is captivity, he wonders, what was freedom supposed to be? And if everything he was warned about this place was false, what else was? The question lodges in his mind, refusing to leave. And soon the Americans will begin answering it, without saying a word. The first crack doesn't come from an American. It comes from another German. It happens in the recreation hut on a rainy afternoon, when boredom presses harder than hunger ever did. A chessboard sits between 2 prisoners, its pieces worn smooth from use. Karl Weiss watches as Franz Keller studies the board, frowning. "That move makes no sense," Keller mutters. "They wouldn't allow this." Weiss knows what he means. Not the move. The situation. The hut smells of damp wood, tobacco, and coffee. Real coffee. Outside, rain taps steadily against the tin roof. Inside, there is warmth, light, time. Time to think. Weeks have passed since Weiss arrived in America. The camp no longer feels temporary. It feels organized, intentional, as if this is exactly how it was meant to be. Work details begin soon after. Weiss is assigned to a nearby farm, repairing fences and hauling lumber. He is paid in scrip, redeemable at the camp canteen. Paid. The first time he receives the small stack of bills, he turns them over in his hands, waiting for someone to laugh and take them back. No one does. At the canteen, he buys chocolate. The taste is almost shocking. Sweet, rich, unnecessary. He hasn't tasted anything like it since before the war. That night he lies awake, staring at the ceiling. Chocolate for prisoners. Money for labor. Coffee without ration cards. None of this fits. Some men push back harder than others. This is manipulation, a former party member insists during evening roll call. They want us grateful, weak. The word weak hangs in the air. Weiss doesn't argue. He understands the need to believe that. If this is manipulation, then resistance still matters. If it's kindness, then everything they fought for becomes harder to justify. The Americans do not interfere with these conversations. They don't listen in. They don't correct the prisoners. They don't need to. A camp newspaper appears one morning printed entirely in German. It lists Allied advances, names cities, shows maps, no dramatic language, no insults. Just facts. Berlin bombed again. The Rhine crossed. Soviet forces nearing the Oder. Some men refuse to read it, others devour every issue. Weiss reads it cover to cover. Then come the films. The prisoners are told attendance is voluntary. Almost everyone goes. The projector hums to life, the screen flickers, grainy images fill the room. Rail lines, barbed wire, emaciated figures in striped uniforms, piles of bodies. No narration at first, just images. The room goes silent. A man near the back stands abruptly and leaves. Another covers his face with his hands. Someone whispers, "This can't be real." But it is. Weiss feels his stomach twist. He had heard rumors at the front, jokes made to silence discomfort, orders not to ask questions. Now the questions have faces. The Americans do not comment when the film ends. The lights come up slowly. Men file out in silence. That night Weiss cannot sleep. The food. The order. The rules. And now this. The contrast is unbearable. He thinks of Sergeant Miller, the American who supervises the lumber detail. Older, quiet, chews gum constantly. The next day, during a break, Weiss finally asks him, "Why do you treat us like this?" Miller shrugs, "Because that's how it's done." No speech, no moral lesson. Just certainty. That certainty is devastating. Weeks later, a Red Cross inspection passes through the camp. Prisoners speak freely. Complaints are noted. Changes are made. Weiss realizes something then that he cannot unlearn. Fear had kept him loyal far longer than belief ever did. Here, fear is absent. And without it, the old slogans sound hollow. The old certainties collapse under their own weight. Standing at the fence one evening, watching the sun dip behind the trees, Weiss understands that something inside him has already surrendered. Not to the Americans, to the truth. But the hardest part is still coming. Because soon the war will end. And when it does, Weiss will have to face what he believed and what he allowed. May 7th, 1945. Early evening. The air is thick and still. Carl Weiss is stacking crates in the camp kitchen when the siren sounds. Not the shrill, panicked scream of an air raid. This is slower, longer, almost uncertain. Guards stop what they're doing, trucks idle. Somewhere near the administration building, voices rise. Then the loudspeakers crackle. Germany has surrendered. For a second, the words don't register. Then they do. The camp exhales. Some prisoners laugh, the sound sharp and almost hysterical. Others sink onto benches, faces in their hands. A few stand perfectly still, as if the ground has dropped away beneath them. Weiss feels nothing at first. No relief. No grief. Just emptiness. The war that shaped every decision of his adult life is suddenly over, announced in a single sentence by a voice he barely recognizes. That evening, the Americans make no speeches. There are no victory marches, no celebrations inside the wire. Coffee is served again. Extra bread appears at dinner. Sergeant Miller leans against a truck, watching quietly. "You'll be heading home soon," he says. Home. The word sounds unfamiliar. Over the next days, the language changes. Prisoner becomes displaced personnel. Paperwork replaces roll calls. Medical exams replace inspections. Weiss is issued civilian clothing, plain trousers, a shirt that doesn't quite fit. He watches as his uniform is folded and tagged. For the first time in years, he is no longer wearing a symbol. Before departure, the Americans show one last film. It is longer than the others, harder to watch. The camps, the graves, the survivors speaking into the camera. No one leaves early. The Americans do not explain, they do not accuse, they let the images remain. This, Weiss realizes, is not punishment. It is confrontation. The journey back to Europe is quiet. Men stare out at the sea, writing letters they may never send. The jokes are gone, the theories have evaporated. When Weiss steps off the transport in Germany, the silence deepens. Cities lie in ruins, rail yards twisted, familiar streets erased. People move slowly, eyes down, as if afraid to be seen. His mother opens the door after a long pause. She studies him carefully. "You look well," she says. He nods. At dinner they eat thin soup and rationed bread. The contrast is painful. Captivity had been easier than peace. Weeks later, as Weiss clears rubble from a collapsed building, he thinks back to the first day in the American camp. The stew, the white bread, the coffee. It had not been charity. It had been a message. This is how prisoners are treated. This is how rules matter. This is how lies are defeated without shouting. Years later, when Weiss tells his story, he does not begin with battle or surrender. He begins with a tray. Steam rising from food he did not expect. A kindness he had been warned not to trust. Because that was the moment everything he believed began to fall apart. And in its place, something heavier grew. Understanding. And